In the heart of the African wilderness, rescuers found a man tied tightly to a tree, barely clinging to life. But what left everyone speechless wasn't his injuries. It was the massive lion standing guard beside him. The beast didn't roar, didn't threaten. It simply protected him as if it had known him for years. Why would a predator risk its life for a human? The truth behind that moment is a story you won't be able to look away from. The first thing Evan Miller felt was the heat, dry, heavy, pressing against his skin like he'd been left inside an oven that refused to cool. When his eyes finally opened, all he could see were the crooked arms of a massive baobab tree stretching above him. A moment later, the burning sting around his wrists pulled him fully awake. He tried to move, but his arms wouldn't budge. Thick ropes dug into his skin. His ankles were tied just as tightly. Only then did reality settle in. He wasn't resting against the tree. He was bound to it. For a moment, Evan thought this had to be some kind of desert fever dream, but the pain in his ribs, sharp, familiar, unmistakably real, told him the truth. Someone had beaten him before leaving him here. And not just someone. He remembered voices, the harsh laughter, the metallic click of a rifle being loaded, the way those men spat the word ranger like it was an insult. His breath grew tight as fragments of memory crawled back into place. He had been patrolling the southern edge of the reserve. He had radioed about the poachers moving through the area. Then pain. Sudden, blinding, a blow to the back of his head, darkness. And now, this. He tested the ropes again. Nothing. Whoever tied him knew exactly what they were doing. Survival training didn't count for much when your arms were pinned so tight the ropes cut circulation. Evan exhaled slowly, trying not to panic. The air tasted like dust and old sun-baked earth. Above him, hungry-looking vultures circled lazily, as if already calculating how long it would take for his body to stop moving. Their shadows drifted across the ground like silent warnings. His throat burned with thirst. His lips felt cracked, his tongue dry. Judging by the sky's hazy gold, it was late afternoon, the most dangerous time to be helpless in the African heat. If the sun didn't finish him, the night would. He could already hear distant howls carrying through the tall grass, the kind of sound that crawls under a man's skin. Hyenas. Not close yet, but close enough to remind him how little time he had. Wild animals didn't show mercy, and poachers even less. A sharp breeze pushed dust into his eyes. Evan blinked it away, and that was when he noticed the dark, rusty stain dried onto the front of his shirt. He tried to inhale, but his ribs screamed in protest. So the blood was his. He had taken more damage than he realized. If infection didn't come for him, dehydration would. The grim irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent half his life working to protect wildlife, fighting illegal trafficking, helping rescue injured animals for conservation groups. He had even helped promote educational programs online, everything from wildlife protection initiatives to eco-travel awareness. Yet here he was now, abandoned like an old piece of trash left to rot. Evan tilted his head back against the tree trunk and looked across the savannah. Endless grass, isolated termite mounds, heat waves rising from the ground. No sign of another human being. His radio, his lifeline, was nowhere to be seen. The poachers must have smashed it. His phone, gone too. Sunlight dipped lower, turning the horizon into a deep orange ribbon. Soon the night would swallow everything, and with it came creatures that moved with silent cruelty. Just imagining the glowing eyes of predators approaching made his heartbeat twist painfully. He pulled against the ropes again, desperation pushing him harder this time. His wrists burned. His shoulders felt like they might tear from their sockets, but nothing loosened, not even a millimeter. The ropes held firm, biting deeper into his skin with each instinctive struggle. Finally, drained and trembling, he slumped back. Sweat rolled down his spine. His breath rasped in his chest. "This can't be it," he whispered to himself, though his voice was barely a whisper at all. But the savannah didn't answer. No breeze, no birds, only the heavy quietness of the wild, an unsettling kind of silence that made a man feel smaller than a grain of sand. Evan felt the first flicker of real fear settle inside him. Not the fear of dying, but the fear of dying alone, without anyone knowing where he was, without anyone understanding what had happened. He had seen too many cases in his career, people disappearing during anti-poaching patrols, their families left with nothing but questions. He didn't want to be one of them. A crackle of movement tugged his attention to the grass line. His breath hitched. His eyes strained. At first he thought it was just the wind. Then the tall grass parted, just slightly, like something was moving through it with a slow, deliberate step. Evan's pulse hammered against his ribs. Nothing good ever moved that quietly out here. He stared harder, the world narrowing into that single, wavering patch of grass. Another sound came, a low, steady crunch of dry stems being pressed under weight. Heavy weight. Evan swallowed hard. Every instinct he had, every year of wildlife work, told him that whatever was coming was large and carnivorous. He tried again to pull the ropes from the tree, but they held him hostage, helpless, exposed. He could do nothing but watch. The grass parted one final time. And something stepped out, something big, something with golden fur catching the last light of the sun. Evan's breath froze completely. A lion. A full-grown male lion, broad-shouldered, scarred, and far too close. And as it lifted its head, to look directly at him, Evan knew the night was far from his worst problem. The lion's shadow stretched across the dust like a silent warning, and for a moment Evan forgot how to breathe. The massive animal stood still, head slightly lowered, studying him. Not the way a predator studies prey before the kill, but with an odd, unsettling focus, almost awareness. Yet no amount of strange behavior could erase the simple truth. Evan was tied, injured, and defenseless. If the lion chose violence, there was nothing he could do. But before he could process the danger in front of him, something inside his mind unlocked. A memory, sharp and sudden, pushed forward through the haze of pain. The poachers, those men, how they shouted, how they dragged him by his collar. He remembered stumbling, sand rushing up to his face, then a boot slamming into his ribs. He remembered the metallic taste of blood and the frantic thought that he needed to reach for his radio, needed to call in his unit. But one of the men had caught him moving and smashed the radio under his heel. The crackling sound of broken circuitry might as well have been the crack of a judge's gavel. They hadn't tied him up out of panic. They'd tied him up with intention. Evan had overheard them earlier in the day, whispering about a buyer, a foreign client looking to pay thousands for a wild lion cub. That kind of illegal wildlife trafficking wasn't just cruel. It was the kind of organized crime he'd spent years fighting against. He had documented evidence for advocacy groups, participated in online awareness campaigns about animal cruelty, wildlife law enforcement, and even helped promote safe travel programs across Africa. He knew how ruthless these networks could be, but he had never imagined he'd become one of their targets. He remembered the way their leader, a man with a jagged scar across his cheek, had grabbed him by the vest. "You're getting in the way again, Ranger," he had growled, "so let the animals decide what to do with you." The lion took a single step closer, pulling Evan from the memory, and slamming him back into the present. Its paw sank into the dust with a soft thud, each movement deliberate, its eyes never leaving him. Evan felt the ropes tighten painfully as his body instinctively tensed. He knew better than to move suddenly, but even still, fear rippled through him. Then, just beyond the lion's shoulder, something else glinted in the fading light. A small metallic object half buried in the grass. At first, Evan thought it was just another piece of broken equipment, but when the lion shifted, allowing the sun to spill over it, Evan saw the shape clearly. It was a GPS collar, the kind used for tracking younger lions inside the reserve. But this one had been sliced open, the internal chipset ripped out. That could only mean one thing. The poachers were targeting a cub. A specific cub. And they didn't want the rangers to know where it had been taken. A sick feeling crawled through Evan's stomach. If the poachers had removed the collar, the cub was already in danger, or worse. He didn't get long to dwell on it. A faint rustle shivered through the grass behind the lion. Evan squinted, pulse jumping. For one terrible moment he expected another predator. But the grass twitched again, lighter this time, uneven, almost human. Someone was moving out there. The lion's ears flicked back, catching the sound as well. It turned its head slightly, its gaze shifting toward the movement. The hairs on Evan's arms rose. If those were the poachers coming back to finish the job, he wouldn't stand a chance. They might shoot the lion just to clear the scene. Or worse, use it to send a message to other rangers. Evan forced his dry throat to work. "Is someone there?" he croaked, though the words barely carried. No reply. Only the soft whisper of disturbed grass. The lion, however, had heard enough. It took another step, this time angled slightly in front of Evan, positioning its body between him and the unseen presence. Its muscles bunched under its golden coat, not in preparation for an attack on Evan, but to defend something. The realization stunned him. The lion wasn't watching Evan. It was guarding him. Evan felt his heartbeat shift, not slowing, but changing direction. A different kind of fear, a different kind of awe. But he couldn't let himself believe the lion was here for him, not yet. It made no sense. A wild lion didn't guard a helpless human. Not unless... The memory of that small lion cub he once saved flickered in his mind, still faint, still uncertain. It wasn't enough to make sense of this moment. Not yet. A sudden snapping sound tore through the air, a branch breaking under something heavy. The lion lowered its head, lips tightening, teeth flashing white. But instead of charging toward the sound, it released a low, warning growl, one meant for whatever lurked in the brush. Evan's mouth went dry as stone. Poachers. They came back. His chest tightened. If they found him alive, they'd make sure he didn't stay that way. They didn't want witnesses. They didn't want rangers interfering with their business, and if they decided the lion was worth money, they'd try to dart it or shoot it, right here, right now. The tension stretched thin like the air itself was holding its breath. But then, silence. Whoever had been there slipped away into the dusk, leaving only a trembling path of flattened grass behind. The lion slowly eased out of its battle stance, though its tail still flicked sharply, its ears alert. Evan swallowed hard, fighting the wave of exhaustion tugging at him. He was running out of time, running out of strength, and the night was coming, fast. He lifted his head, forcing his blurry eyes to meet the lion's gaze again. What are you doing here?" he whispered, though the animal obviously didn't answer, but something about the way it looked at him, steady, searching, felt eerily familiar. The ropes held him fast, and danger lingered all around. Yet in that moment, with the lion standing silently before him, Evan sensed the first shift in his fate. Not salvation, not safety. Something stranger, something that made the line between predator and protector blur in a way he couldn't explain. But soon, he would. The sun slid lower, turning the savannah into a world washed in amber and long, trembling shadows. Evan could feel the temperature dropping, though the air around him was still thick with heat, dust, and the faint metallic scent of his own dried blood. But none of that compared to the presence standing a few yards away. A full-grown lion, its mane glowing like molten gold in the dying light. The creature stood motionless, except for the slow rise and fall of its breath, as if it were studying him, measuring him, trying to understand what he was. For a man tied to a tree with no way to defend himself, having a lion this close should have sparked nothing but terror. And fear was there, cold and sharp, running up his spine, but it wasn't the same fear he expected. It didn't feel like a predator evaluating its next meal. It felt like something different, intentional, almost contemplative. The lion's eyes, deep, amber, unsettlingly intelligent, didn't track his throat or his limbs the way hunting lions did. Instead, they stayed locked on the ropes, digging into his skin. Evan followed the animal's gaze, uncertain if he was imagining it. When the lion leaned in slightly, its whiskers twitching, sniffing the rough fibers of the ropes, a strange chill crept through him. Why is it? Looking at the bindings. A soft breeze rolled across the plain, stirring the grass. The lion lifted its head, scenting the air, its nostrils flaring. Then it looked back at Evan. Directly, unflinchingly. Its expression shifting from neutral to something close to recognition. Not the recognition of a meal, nor an intruder, but something older, deeper, older than language itself. Evan's heartbeat fluttered painfully. He knew lions. He'd observed them for years. None of them ever looked at a human like this. He felt a pulse of dizziness from dehydration and shut his eyes for a brief second. When he opened them again, the lion had stepped closer, so quietly he hadn't heard a single footfall. It was now near enough that Evan could see the individual strands of its mane and the pale scars tracing across its shoulders. One scar in particular ran down its left foreleg, long and thin, shaped strikingly like the letter Vi. Seeing it made his breath catch. That scar, that shape. It scraped something buried in his memory, something he couldn't pull into focus. Not yet. The lion's breath warmed his face as it lowered its head, sniffing again at the ropes. Then, in a sudden shift of behavior, it released a deep, rumbling growl. The sound vibrated through Evan's chest, but it wasn't aimed at him. The lion's gaze burned at the fibers as if it despised them. A predator growling at rope. It made no sense. Evan's mind raced. He knew poachers often used cheap, harsh-smelling rope treated with synthetic oil. Maybe the scent lingered. Maybe the lion associated it with danger. The illegal wildlife trade was full of chemicals and traps. Evan had written reports and even public consumer awareness pieces about it for animal welfare organizations. The smell was likely familiar to the lion, but that still didn't explain this level of agitation. Lions avoided traps. They didn't get emotional about them. Another step, another soft growl, another look, one that felt painfully close to understanding. Evan couldn't look away. There was a strange pull in the animal's behavior, as though the lion stood between the wild it belonged to and a memory it couldn't let go of. The gap between them, man and beast, felt thinner than it had any right to be. Then the lion sat down, just sat, right in front of him. Its tail flicked once, its head held high, body relaxed, but alert. Evan had seen lions claim territory, protect kills, guard cubs. He had never seen one sit like a sentinel in front of a tied-up human. The posture was wrong, entirely wrong, completely unnatural. "What are you doing?" Evan whispered, his voice cracked and barely audible. The lion blinked slowly. The grass line behind it rustled. The lion's ears flicked toward the sound instantly. It didn't turn its body, just angled its head and released another low, warning growl. Evan stiffened. The movement reminded him painfully of the earlier danger, the footsteps, the poachers, the feeling of being hunted. But this time, whatever had been there slipped away after the lion's growl, as if intimidated by its presence. Once the rustling stopped, the lion turned its head back toward Evan, watching him with a focus that bordered on eerie. Evan could feel something shifting inside his mind, pieces of memory pushing upward. The cub from 2 summers ago, the one he had rescued, bandaged, protected, and eventually watched limp back into the wild. He had never forgotten the moment it looked at him one last time before vanishing into tall grass. But a cub would be grown now, big, strong, scarred. He stared again at the long V-shaped scar on the lion's foreleg. His breath caught. "No," he whispered. "It can't be you." The lion made a soft chuffing sound, gentle, short, unmistakably familiar to anyone who had ever worked with young lions. A sound cubs made when greeting something they didn't fear. The world around Evan seemed to tilt. The tree, the grass, the entire savannah spinning around one impossible truth slowly rising in his chest. He wanted to deny it, dismiss it as sunstroke or dehydration. But everything, its posture, its scent, its scar, its behavior, fit the memory he had buried under years of ranger work. Still, the moment verged on the surreal. A grown lion recognizing a human, returning to him, acting as if it knew him? It shouldn't be possible. And yet the lion lifted its head, stepped closer, and released a soft breath against Evan's cheek, warm, steady, far too gentle for a creature born to kill. It nudged his knee lightly, as if testing him, asking him a question without words. Evan's heart twisted. The ropes held his body prisoner, but his mind was suddenly free, racing through the past, through the memory of tearing a steel trap open with trembling hands, through the long nights spent watching over a wounded cub he wasn't even sure would live. Recognition hit him so hard his chest ached. He knew this lion, and the lion impossibly knew him. The savannah, moments ago indifferent and merciless, now felt like it was holding its breath. Something extraordinary was beginning. 2 summers earlier, the savannah had looked very different to Evan Miller. Back then, he wasn't tied to a tree, fighting dehydration, or watching death circle him from the shadows. He was simply doing what he loved, tracking lion movements for a conservation project, updating GPS data, and documenting the growth of several young males in the southern region of the reserve. It was honest work, meaningful work, the kind that reminded him why he'd left a stable job in the city. People always assumed wildlife conservation was dangerous, and they were right. But the danger never frightened him. The wilderness felt like home, safer in many ways than big cities filled with scams, financial risks, or the endless noise of modern life. Out here, everything was honest, every threat real, every sunrise earned. He remembered the exact morning he'd found the cub. The air had been cooler, carrying the faint smell of rain, and the grass still held beads of dew like little pearls. Evan was scanning the ground for tracks when he heard it. A sound so small and broken he almost missed it. A faint, trembling cry, unlike the calls of adult lions. It was the kind of cry that came from fear or pain. He followed the sound through a patch of thorn scrub, pushing branches aside until he found a shallow pit in the ground. At the bottom lay a lion cub, maybe 8 months old, its eyes wide with panic. One leg was trapped in a steel snare, the metal cutting deep into its flesh. Blood matted the fur around the wound. The cub tried to stand but collapsed instantly, roaring weakly before curling into itself. Evan froze. Even a young lion was capable of killing a man if cornered. And this one was cornered. But as he watched, the cub didn't growl at him, didn't bare its teeth. It just trembled, eyes unfocused, breathing ragged and shallow. Evan slowly knelt, speaking softly. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." The cub's ears twitched. Its gaze flickered toward him, full of exhaustion more than aggression. Evan's stomach tightened. Infection had already started. If the cub didn't get help soon, it wouldn't survive the day. He radioed for backup, but static answered him. Thick cloud cover had knocked out the signal again, something that happened often in this part of the reserve. He had two choices: walk 5 miles back to the outpost for help and risk the cub dying alone, or try to free it himself. He knew what policy said: never attempt a one-man rescue on a big cat, but rules were written by people who didn't have to look into the eyes of something frightened and suffering. So he stayed. He worked slowly, talking to the cub the entire time, even though he knew it didn't understand the words. Words weren't the point, tone was. He poured water over the snare to clean the fur, wiped the blood with the corner of his shirt, and used the multi-tool knife he always carried to pry the hinge. The cub spasmed once when the metal shifted, but didn't attack him. It only whimpered, small, heartbreaking sounds that pushed Evan faster. After nearly an hour of struggling, the mechanism snapped open. The cub yanked its leg back instinctively, letting out a hoarse cry. Evan grabbed a bandage strip from his kit and wrapped the wound carefully, knowing it wasn't enough. He needed a veterinarian. He needed antibiotics. He needed help. He made the decision, Bodhi, instantly. He would carry the cub if he had to. But he didn't need to. As if understanding he was trying to help, the small lion dragged itself into the shade. Evan stayed nearby, keeping watch. When the vet team finally arrived, an hour longer than he liked, the cub was nearly unconscious but still breathing. Over the next 2 weeks, Evan visited every day. He cleaned the wound, checked the bandages, monitored its fluids, and brought fresh meat when it was finally strong enough to eat. At first, the cub recoiled whenever he approached, but by the 3rd visit, it had stopped growling. By the 7th, it let him touch its shoulder. And by the 10th, it rested its head near his boot while he refilled its water. The vet even joked that Evan had become the cub's emotional support human, a line that earned quiet laughter from the team. But the moment that stayed with him, the one he would never forget, was the day they released it. The cub, still limping but strong, stepped out into the tall grass. It took only a few paces before it turned back. Its amber eyes locked on Evan's, holding him there in a silent moment that stretched far longer than it should have. No fear, no threat, just acknowledgement, a moment that felt strangely like trust. And then the cub vanished into the grass, swallowed by the wild. Evan often thought about it afterward. He wondered if the cub survived, if it remembered him, if it ever recognized his scent carried on the wind. The reserve was enormous, and lions were always on the move. He knew the chances of seeing it again were nearly 0. That was 2 summers ago. Now, tied to a tree with death circling him, Evan looked at the grown lion standing before him, the powerful mane, the golden coat, the long scar shaped exactly like the one left by that steel snare, and he felt a shock run through him. Memories collided with the present. The cub's eyes, the gentleness, the scar, the way it sat between him and danger now, the same way he once knelt between it and a cruel trap. Evan whispered, voice shaking, "It really is you." isn't it?" The lion huffed softly, head tilting in a gesture so familiar it made Evan's throat tighten. A strange warmth spread through his chest, hope mixed with disbelief. He had never believed animals held grudges or remembered kindness the way people do. But right then, with the lion standing close enough that he could feel its breath, he knew he had been wrong. He had saved a life 2 years ago, and now, impossibly, that same life had come back to him, this time to save his. Night on the savannah didn't arrive gently. It fell like a curtain, sudden and absolute. One moment the horizon still glowed with the last thin line of sunset. The next it was swallowed in deep violet and creeping black. The shift in temperature hit Evan instantly. The heat of the day had evaporated, replaced by a cold that wrapped around his battered body like a shroud. But even the darkness, even the cold, weren't the most threatening change. What truly made his pulse spike was the sound rising from the field around him. Hyenas. Not one, not two. A pack. Their laughter, sharp, manic, echoing across the plain, grew louder with every breath. Evan felt the ropes around his wrists tighten painfully as his muscles tensed. He had heard hyenas tear apart wounded buffalo. He had seen them steal kills from lions. And he was tied, injured, bleeding, an easy target, a helpless meal. His heart thrashed inside his chest as the laughter shifted into low growls, circling unseen through the tall grass. The lion in front of him, the one he now believed to be the cub he'd once rescued, rose to its feet as if pulled by a wire. Its shoulders squared, its tail stiffened. The soft flicker of gentleness vanished, replaced by a predator's lethal focus. The animal stepped in front of Evan, placing its massive body between him and the approaching danger. It didn't look back, but the message was clear. Stay behind me. Evan swallowed, breath shallow and ragged. Easy, easy, buddy, he whispered, though he knew the lion didn't need reassurance. He did. The first pair of glowing eyes appeared in the dark, yellow, unblinking, locked onto them. Then another, and another. Soon there were at least 6 sets, weaving through the shadows, forming an uneven circle. The hyenas moved with the confidence of creatures who rarely back down from a fight. They were opportunists, scavengers, but also fearless hunters when the odds were in their favor. Tonight the odds looked good for them. One of the larger hyenas crept forward, its head low, lips curled back to reveal jagged teeth. It let out a chattering snarl that sent a tremor up Evan's spine. He could almost feel its hunger, its anticipation. The lion responded with a thunderous roar that shook the air itself. The sound rolled across the plains like a physical force, powerful enough to make the hyena hesitate. But hesitation didn't mean retreat. The circle tightened. A second hyena lunged from the left, fast, silent, a blur of teeth and mottled fur. The lion pivoted, muscles bunching, and struck sideways with its paw. The impact sent the hyena tumbling across the dust, yelping as it scrambled back into the dark. Evan felt a flash of awe. The power behind that single strike could have shattered bone. But the pack didn't scatter. They regrouped. Hyenas were smart, cunning, and they knew lions tired quickly in drawn-out fights. Evan watched helplessly as 2 more shapes advanced from opposite sides. The lion took a step back, positioning itself more firmly between Evan and the threats, grounding its paws into the dirt. Then the attack came, coordinated, vicious, almost impossible to track in the dark. One hyena lunged at the lion's flank. Another went for the front paw. A third attacked from behind. The lion roared again, spinning to defend itself. But 3 attackers at once was brutal even for a fully grown male. Teeth sank into its hind leg, Claws raked across its shoulder. The lion staggered under the weight of the blows, the snarling chaos swallowing the night. Evan cried out without meaning to. "No, get off him!" The lion fought brutally, twisting, slashing, biting, but for every hyena it knocked aside, another darted in to snap at its legs. The pack smelled weakness. They smelled blood, lion blood. And that meant fresh opportunity. One hyena clamped its jaws onto the lion's back, right near the spine. The lion buckled, slamming its body sideways in an attempt to shake the animal off, but it held tight. Another lunged straight toward Evan, as if realizing he might be the easier target. Evan's breath shattered in his chest. He pulled against the ropes with everything he had left. His skin burned, his shoulders screamed, but nothing gave. The hyena moved closer, its silhouette sharpening against the faint moonlight. Evan scanned the ground desperately, searching for anything, a rock, a branch, anything within reach. His hand brushed something. A thick, gnarled root lay half-buried near his foot. Evan couldn't lift it with both hands tied, but he could move his leg. He kicked the root upward, hooking it with the edge of his shoe. The rough piece of wood rolled closer. Using every ounce of strength he had left, he lifted his leg again, pinning the root between his ankle and the tree, inching it upward. His muscles trembled violently. When it finally rose high enough, Evan jerked his body sideways, letting the root fall across his lap. He hooked it with his bound wrists, gripping tight despite the pain. The hyena charging at him was only a few feet away now. "Not today," Evan rasped. Summoning the last of his strength, he swung the heavy root downward like a club. It slammed into the side of the hyena's jaw with a dull crack. The animal shrieked, stumbling sideways before fleeing back into the darkness. The lion, momentarily freed from one attacker, looked back at Evan. Their eyes met, fear, gratitude, and understanding passing between them in an instant. Then the lion turned back toward the pack, roaring with renewed fury. But before either of them could regain footing, a new sound shattered the air. A deep guttural snarl, lower, heavier, unlike the hyenas. Evan's stomach dropped. From the right, a shadow slipped between the grass. Sleek, muscular, moving with the grace of a ghost. Two reflective eyes fixed on the chaos near the tree. A leopard, silent, deadly, opportunistic, drawn by the scent of blood. The savannah had just turned from dangerous to lethal. And Evan, still tied and barely conscious, could only watch as a second predator stalked toward them, ready to take advantage of the carnage. For several long seconds, the world seemed to freeze. Evan, tied and trembling, the lion panting heavily, blood streaking its mane. The hyenas retreating with uneasy whines, and, just beyond the edge of moonlight, the leopard watching in perfect stillness. Its spotted coat blended into the night so well that it looked more like a moving shadow than flesh and bone. Evan felt his heartbeat throb in his throat. A leopard entering a fight with a wounded lion was rare, but hunger and opportunity could twist nature into strange shapes. The lion turned its head slightly, acknowledging the new threat with a low rumble. Its strength was draining fast. Its hind leg bled from puncture wounds, and its breathing had grown rough, uneven. The leopard crept closer, shoulders rolling with silent grace. Evan knew its style, fast, decisive, lethal. A lion was powerful, yes, but a leopard was a ghost in the dark, capable of killing with one perfectly placed bite. "Please, just go," Evan whispered to no one and everyone at once. His voice cracked like dry leaves. The leopard paused, its golden eyes narrowing. It wasn't afraid of him. It hadn't even looked at him. It was assessing the lion. and judging by the way its tail twitched, it believed the lion was weak enough to challenge. But then, another shift. The hyenas, sensing the leopard's arrival, began to scatter fully. One yelped and bolted, another slunk backward, then turned tail and ran. Hyenas hated competing with leopards. They avoided the risk of a two-way fight. Within moments, the night grew quieter. The pack dissolved into the dark, leaving only the two big cats and one helpless man tied to a tree. The lion lowered its head and released a roar, not the earth-shaking call of dominance from earlier, but a raw, warning growl. The leopard took 2 more steps forward, then stopped again. Evan felt the tension twist tighter, like the whole savannah was holding its breath. Then, surprisingly, the leopard stepped back. Not far, just enough to show it wasn't interested in a full confrontation. Maybe it sensed the lion's desperation. Maybe it understood that this wounded giant would fight to the last breath. Or maybe the chaos had ruined its hunting advantage. Whatever the reason, it melted back into the tall grass and vanished as quietly as it had come. Silence returned. Only the wind remained, whispering through the grass like a sigh of relief. The lion turned toward Evan again. It took a step, then another, but its legs wobbled under its weight. Blood stained the ground beneath it. Evan felt panic rise in his chest. "You're hurt," he whispered. "God, you're hurt bad." The lion closed the remaining distance, lowered its massive head, and pushed gently against Evan's bound wrists, an unmistakable gesture. Then it walked behind the tree, teeth working at the rope again. Evan felt the fibers loosen and sag, rough threads rubbing against his bruised skin. Then, snap! The rope around his wrists gave way. His arms fell forward limply, blood rushing back through his fingers like fire. The lion moved to his ankles, tugging and chewing at the final restraints until one more sharp crack sounded in the night. Evan was free. But freedom didn't mean strength. When he tried to stand, his knees buckled immediately. The world tilted, colors blurring into streaks. He reached out instinctively, and the lion stepped closer, pressing its shoulder against his side, holding him upright. Evan leaned heavily on the warm, steady weight. The lion was breathing hard, but its posture was firm, protective. Slowly, painfully, Evan placed one foot forward, then another. It felt like lifting cinder blocks. His legs trembled, threatening to collapse again. But the lion stayed beside him, matching his pace with surprising patience. "Thank you," Evan murmured, voice trembling. "I don't know how. But thank you." The lion didn't look at him, didn't respond, at least not in any human way. But its steady presence was answer enough. Their journey began. The night spread around them in every direction, vast and merciless. Stars blinked overhead, thousands of them, casting cold silver light across the grass. Every sound mattered. The rustle of leaves, the creaking of branches, the distant bark of African wild dogs on the hunt. Evan felt vulnerable with every step, barely conscious, barely mobile, but he wasn't alone. They navigated a shallow ravine where loose stones threatened to send Evan tumbling. The lion moved ahead first, testing the unstable ground. When Evan's foot slipped, the lion shifted instantly, bracing him with its flank. It wasn't just guiding him, it was protecting him deliberately, almost methodically, like a creature that understood danger more intimately than any human insurance expert or survival instructor ever could. Half a mile later, a herd of elephants rumbled nearby, their silhouettes enormous against the moonlit sky. Evan stiffened. A startled elephant was far deadlier than any predator. The lion positioned itself between Evan and the herd, lowering its body, waiting until the elephants passed safely before nudging Evan forward again. Time stretched. Evan couldn't tell if minutes or hours passed. His mind drifted in and out of clarity. At one point, he muttered something about needing a lawyer, a personal injury attorney, or someone who can help me write a will, nonsense born from delirium and exhaustion. The lion simply huffed softly and kept walking. Eventually, Evan's strength failed entirely. His legs buckled and he crumpled to his knees. The lion turned back instantly, nuzzling his shoulder with a gentle urgency. I can't," Evan whispered, his voice barely a breath. The lion nudged him again, harder this time, as if refusing to accept defeat. But Evan's vision tunneled. His eyelids grew too heavy to lift. He slumped sideways, catching himself with one trembling hand. His journey should have ended there, but the lion refused to leave him. It stood over him, silent and patient, guarding him as the night deepened around them. And when Evan's consciousness slipped like sand between his fingers, the last thing he felt was the warm brush of the lion's mane against his cheek. Steady, protective, impossibly gentle. The wild had taken many things from many men, but tonight it seemed determined to give something back, something no one on earth would believe unless they saw it with their own eyes. For a long while, Evan drifted in and out of consciousness, suspended between the sharp sting of pain and the numb, hovering quiet that came with exhaustion. The savannah around him faded into a blur of shadow and moonlight. Every now and then he felt the brush of a warm mane against his cheek, or the soft thud of paws moving in a slow, protective circle near him. The lion never strayed far. Even in the moments when Evan could barely hold his eyes open, he sensed the animal watching over him, standing guard, the way a loyal dog might protect its owner. But this was no dog. This was a giant, raw power wrapped around a bond he still didn't fully understand. When Evan finally stirred again, the lion reacted immediately. It nudged his shoulder, then stepped close enough for its body heat to wrap around him like a blanket. Evan tried to sit up, but his muscles screamed. The world tilted sideways before settling back into place. "Easy. I'm trying," he whispered. He planted his palm on the dirt and pushed. His arm trembled violently under his own weight. The lion leaned its body against his, steadying him. With its help, Evan managed to rise to his knees, then to one unsteady foot, then to both. His breath came in rough, uneven gasps. "Just one more mile," he muttered, not knowing if that was true or just something hopeful his mind invented. But the lion seemed to understand the intention behind the words. It stepped forward, positioning itself beside him, ready to guide him once more. Together they moved. The night air was cold enough that it stung the inside of Evan's nose, and each inhale felt like ice sliding down his throat. The tall grass brushed against his legs as the two silhouettes, one human, one lion, made their slow, halting journey across the savannah. In the distance, the cries of nocturnal animals echoed, the whooping call of hyenas, the chirping of insects, the low moan of a faraway buffalo. Every sound carried the same underlying warning: you do not belong out here after dark. But Evan wasn't alone. The lion stayed at his side like a silent anchor, nudging him when he drifted, slowing down when he stumbled, stopping completely whenever Evan's knees buckled. The animal's calm steadiness reminded Evan of a guide leading someone through a dangerous financial decision, slow, precise, focused on survival. It was almost absurd how this creature moved with the caution of a seasoned protector. Halfway through their trek, a breeze swept across the plain, rustling the grass. Evan felt his strength slip again. His legs trembled. He collapsed onto his hands and knees, the breath punched from his lungs. "I can't," he whispered, the words barely forming. The lion immediately circled around him, lowering its head until its muzzle touched Evan's cheek. It gave a low, rumbling sound, not aggression, not impatience, but encouragement. When Evan still didn't move, the lion pushed its head under his arm, lifting him gently but firmly until he was upright again. The gesture was so deliberate, so thoughtful, that Evan felt tears sting his eyes. All right, he murmured. I'll try." They continued. The terrain changed subtly, sloping upward. Evan recognized the faint outline of rocky hills nearby, the edge of the reserve's border. His team often patrolled this area. If he wasn't hallucinating, then they were close, very close. A faint flicker appeared on the horizon. At first, Evan thought it was just a star dipping low. Then he saw a second light, and a third, small, moving, unmistakably artificial. Flashlights. Evan's heart jolted. He blinked rapidly, unsure if it was real, but the lights grew brighter, moving through the tall grass in a slow, sweeping pattern. The patrol. His team. A sob of relief caught in his throat. "I see them! I see them!" He tried to shout, but the sound came out as a cracked whisper. The lion stiffened, its ears tilting toward the movement. It stepped in front of Evan protectively, as if unsure whether these approaching figures meant safety or danger. As the lights drew closer, voices carried through the air, faint at first, then sharper. "Evan! Spread out! Check the ridge! He has to! Be close!" The search team was calling his name. Evan tried again to yell, But his voice failed him. The lion turned its head toward him, then toward the lights, then back again. It made a soft sound, a chuff, low and warm, and nudged him forward as if urging him to try one more time. So he did. He cupped his hands around his mouth and mustered every ounce of strength left in his battered body. "Here! I'm over here!" The sound broke halfway through, but it was enough. The flashlights jerked sharply in his direction. Then came shouts, real, unmistakable, human shouts. "Did you hear that? Over there! Move!" The lion stepped forward, positioning itself between Evan and the approaching figures. It didn't growl, but its muscles tensed, not out of hostility, out of caution. It didn't know these men. It only knew that Evan was weak and needed guarding. Moments later, the first rescuer broke through the grass. His flashlight beam swept across the ground and froze as it landed on the lion. "Oh my God," the man whispered, stumbling back a step. "Hold your fire. There's a lion." 3 more team members arrived, pointing their flashlights and then quickly lowering them so as not to provoke the animal. One of them instinctively lifted a rifle, but another grabbed his arm. "Don't shoot. Evan's right behind it." The lion held its ground, towering between Evan and the rescuers, its amber eyes scanning their movements. Evan lifted a shaking hand. "It's okay," he said hoarsely. He's with me." Stunned silence. No one moved. No one breathed. The lion looked back at Evan once more, as if making sure he was safe. Then, with surprising gentleness, it stepped aside, just enough for the rescuers to approach. The first ranger dropped to his knees beside Evan. "Dear God, we thought we lost you." Evan managed a faint smile. Not yet. Behind him, the lion remained still, watching everything with a quiet, ancient understanding. And for a moment, an impossible, breathtaking moment, the rescuers, hardened men who had seen every brutal corner of the wild, stood in awe at the sight of a lion standing guard over a human like a loyal companion. It was a moment none of them would ever forget, a moment they would struggle to explain for the rest of their lives. The beam of a flashlight swept across Evan's face, momentarily blinding him before settling on the bruises lining his cheeks and the dried blood streaking his neck. Rough hands, Warm, familiar hands reached out to steady him. One ranger eased an arm around his back, while another checked his pulse, muttering something about dehydration and shock. Evan could barely process their voices, their urgency, their relief. His mind was still tethered to the present standing just a few feet away. The lion who had saved him, defended him, guided him across a deadly landscape with a loyalty no one could explain. The rescuers spoke in hurried, staggered sentences. "We need to get him to the truck. He's losing consciousness. Watch his ribs. Looks like he took a hard hit. Call medical. Now." But even through the noise, Evan's attention drifted past them to the lion. The huge creature stood on a slight incline, the moon carving pale outlines along its mane. Its chest rose and fell slowly, painfully. Evan could see droplets of blood darkening the dust beneath its hind leg where the hyena attack had left deep punctures. The lion was hurt, badly, and yet it made no attempt to retreat, no attempt to claim territory or assert dominance. It simply stood there, watching the humans with calm, unwavering eyes. One of the rangers, shaken and unsure, lifted his rifle again out of instinct more than intent. "Should I?" "No." Evan erupted with what little strength he had left, the word ripping from his throat like a wound. His voice cracked, more breath than sound, but its urgency cut through the moment like a blade. Don't you dare." The ranger hesitated, then slowly lowered the weapon again. Evan pushed himself upright with the help of two team members. Every bone in his body screamed, but he ignored it. He had to stand. He had to say goodbye properly, because he knew, with a strange heaviness in his chest, that this moment wouldn't come again. He stepped forward. The lion stiffened, not out of fear, but awareness. It lowered its massive head, meeting Evan's gaze with an expression that felt impossibly human. Evan took another step, dragging his injured leg, ignoring the dizziness that swarmed around him like heat waves. When he finally reached the lion, he lifted his trembling hand. "Hey," he whispered softly. I'm okay now." The lion closed its eyes, leaning forward until its forehead pressed gently against Evan's palm. The contact was warm, steady, grounding, like touching something ancient and alive, something older than fear, older than violence, older than the brutality that had nearly killed them both. It was a gesture of recognition, respect, gratitude. A ranger behind Evan muttered under his breath, "I've never seen anything like it." Evan swallowed hard. "I wouldn't be here without you," he said to the lion, the words barely forming but heavy with truth. "Not this time, not ever." The lion drew back slowly, its amber eyes reflecting the glow of the stars. It looked at Evan for what felt like a lifetime. One final, unbroken gaze filled with everything words could never say. Then it turned. Its massive paws moved silently across the dirt. Its silhouette stretched in the moonlight as it walked away from the group, each step smoother than the last. Despite its injuries, the lion carried itself with the same quiet dignity it always had, a ruler of the wild returning to the only kingdom it knew. The tall grass parted around it, swallowing its golden coat inch by inch until only the flick of its tail remained. Then nothing at all. It vanished into the night, into the endless rhythm of the savannah, as silently as it had arrived. Evan felt something crumble inside him, a mixture of awe, grief, and overwhelming gratitude. He let out a long, trembling breath, one he hadn't realized he'd been holding. One ranger placed a hand on his shoulder. "Come on, Evan, let's get you home." Home. The word felt strange, heavy. But as they walked him back toward the waiting truck, the world around him no longer seemed as dark. The night air was still cold, the dangers still real, but something inside him had shifted. Something he knew would stay with him for the rest of his life. The moment they reached the truck, Evan paused, turning one last time toward the savannah. He knew the lion was long gone, already a ghost in the grass. But he whispered anyway, letting the wind carry the words. "Thank you. I'll never forget you." His team helped him climb into the vehicle. The engine rumbled to life, headlights cutting through the darkness. As the truck rolled forward, Evan leaned his head back and closed his eyes. Memories washed over him, the steel snare from 2 summers ago, the frightened cub he had cradled, the lion's strength during the battle, the warmth of its body as it helped him stand, the gentle press of its forehead against his palm. A bond born in fear, tested in blood, sealed in the wild. The savannah's night songs faded behind them as the truck carried him toward safety. But the echoes of his extraordinary companion lingered, soft, everlasting, etched into his soul. And for everyone who heard the story later, rangers, villagers, wildlife experts, even people far away searching for unbelievable survival stories or watching viral news clips, there was one reaction that echoed across every voice. They were speechless. For some, it was a miracle. For others, a reminder of the fragile balance between man and nature. But for Evan, it was something far deeper. It was proof that kindness, once given, never truly disappears. Sometimes, it walks back to you on 4 paws. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, leave a simple comment below. You don't need to write much. Just drop a 0 or 1 to let me know you're here and still enjoying these journeys. Your small comment keeps this channel alive and helps more people discover these touching wildlife stories. And if you want to walk with us through the next unforgettable tale, make sure to subscribe and turn on the little bell. There are many more incredible, heartwarming stories waiting for you. Thank you for watching and for being part of this family.